we'll see that it's a beautiful concept. It's very integral to Islam, as important, if not more important, than prayer and fasting and Hajj and these other pillars that we know of, that we practice on a regular basis. And it is something that we should be very, very comfortable with and very proud of. And also accept and understand that there is a time and there is a place for armed jihad as well. But also understand that this isn't the time and place. And if there are people who hijack these concepts and practice them in ways that are unjust and evil, that shouldn't make us shy away from the concept itself. Just because jihad is being used by other people in completely un-Islamic ways, right? That shouldn't make us shy away from the concept and be scared of even saying the word jihad for fear of who's listening and what list are we going to get on, right? Alright, so jihad is one of those important areas where violence has a place in some kinds of jihad, some forms of jihad, which unfortunately are not relevant to us right now. Another area of Islamic law where violence has a place is in the penal system, corporal and capital punishment. This is also something that unfortunately is not relevant to us right now because we don't have an Islamic government in place. These are things that are only carried out. That's why this is one of the complaints that we should identify, or one of the problems we should identify in the exercise of these capital and corporal punishments by different terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda and these kinds of people. That they carry out these things in an ad hoc sort of fashion, right? It's established for me that somebody has stolen, and then arbitrarily I become the judge and the executioner and everything, without any authority to do so, when that's not at all the way the Islamic system is supposed to work. In an Islamic system, you have a jurist who understands the comprehensive and Islamic law in a very comprehensive and deep way, and has the authority also to be able to exercise it. And only then are these capital punishments and corporal punishments put into practice. That too, after due process, through a court of law, witnesses have to be brought. It has to be established beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person is actually guilty, right? If there is any doubt, then the person is freed. If there's a whole system, as complex and as rigorous as we think the system of law is here in America, right? Islam is no weaker and no less thorough and no less rigorous in its true system of justice. It's not an arbitrary system where the will of the jurist somehow is exercised without any sort of due process. And we have examples even from the times of the Imams, right? Even the Imams themselves, even the Prophet himself, they didn't exercise law based on any sort of ilm al-ghayb, for instance. They never tapped into a law and said, is this person really guilty or not? Just let me know so I can exercise that law and know from the unseen whether he's guilty or not. They set the example for us. Even if they had access to that sort of knowledge, they never used it conscientiously. They avoided using that in court cases to demonstrate for us how we're actually supposed to proceed. Right? So even if they didn't have evidence, if they couldn't establish the guilt of someone, then the person would go free. Even if he was actually guilty, Allah only would know. Right? They would let the person go free because it wasn't established by due process that the person was actually guilty. Right? And we have many cases that occurred like that. We should appreciate that and realize that the way justice is carried out is rigorous and is something we can be proud of. And there are circumstances when Islam advocates for corporal punishment, which is physical punishment. For instance, lashing for certain kinds of crimes, or amputation for certain kinds of crimes, and so forth, and capital punishment, which is to actually execute the person altogether for certain kinds of crimes. But all of that happens in a very rigorous and a rigorous system that's nothing like what we see, which is basically a sham, a kind of a travesty of justice by Al-Qaeda or Taliban or any of these other people who claim to be doing these things in the name of Islam. A fourth area of Islamic law where there's a role for violence is al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, enjoining good and forbidding evil. This too with many qualifications. We know that enjoining good and forbidding evil is a duty that we have when evil is taking place and a person maybe knows about it, but is failing to practice, or failing to abstain from that haram act. Or knows the duty, but is failing to act on the duty. In that circumstance, when a person is sinning against Allah, that creates a duty on the people around him, in his circle of a sphere of influence, where people then have to step in, Muslims have to step in to try to get that person back on track. Right? It has so many conditions, prerequisites, and then even once the prerequisites are all fulfilled, and it becomes an obligation on me, for instance, to enjoin good or forbid evil for a person, then there's a certain protocol for how it has to be carried out. And the rule of thumb is that enjoining good and forbidding evil happens in the most effective way to actually get the person back on track. So if you want to think of one catch-all phrase that comprehensively addresses all of enjoining good and forbidding evil, it's that. They were supposed to be effective, and that effectiveness happens in many different ways based on culture and circumstances and your relationship with the person. So it could happen in the most unobtrusive way. Sometimes telling someone directly doesn't even work. So the best way to do it is, for instance, to find some other roundabout way to let the person know that he has, for instance, he's remiss in one of his duties. Sometimes that's the way, and it takes a lot of effort on the part of the enjoiner and the forbidder to find that way which is going to be acceptable to that person. Right? So one of the ways that we're able to enjoin good and forbid evil is by telling the person, if that's going to be effective. If telling the person isn't effective and the person's still not accepting it, still not listening to it, then there are circumstances where you can actually intervene in the person's life, stop the person maybe physically. For instance, if he's going to do something, you stop him by holding him, for instance, and holding his hand so he doesn't hit someone, to physically restrain him so he doesn't commit something haram, do something haram, for instance. Or he's about to look at something haram and you cover his eyes and force him not to look, or push his face away so he doesn't look. But we're told that if it comes to the point where you have to exercise violence, where you have to actually, for instance, hit somebody, then we're not allowed to do it of our own accord. There we have to have the express permission for the particular situation from a qualified mujtahid, a qualified jurist. Right? So there is a role for violence, but again, it doesn't really apply to us here, at least not in our circumstances, because we don't have the control and the power of a mujtahid ruling over us to be able to exercise that role of violence. Another area of fiqh where, in Islamic practice, where there is a minor role for violence is in raising children. And this is something that we should also understand, that there is a place for it and how it should be practiced. Right? It is a very, very last resort. And so when we're raising children and they get to the point where they understand good and bad, at the level of what we call their mumayyiz, they're able to differentiate between good and bad, and they understand what it means to have a duty to Allah, these kinds of things, then it's the role of the parents to try to inculcate Islamic values in them, to encourage them to fast and pray and these kinds of things, so they start to do these kinds of things. We're told that in certain instances, like for instance, prayer is one of the examples we're given in a hadith. Of course, like from a pedagogical perspective and in our cultural perspective now, we know that, and this is totally in keeping with Islamic teachings, that the way that we teach our kids to pray, it's got to be a very, very kind of gradual, a gradual kind of movement to establishing this in their hearts, where we're educating them, where we're encouraging them, where we're even bribing them in a way where we're giving them rewards and things like that for doing good deeds, for praying and these kinds of things, right? And it has to be a process of education and explaining things to them and showing them the beauty of things and all of that. However, assume that all of those things, we've done all of those things in the best possible way. We've done our part to bring the child up, and it's not working. The child is still, for instance, not taking prayer seriously, despite all of your best efforts to educate them and encourage them and use all the positive ways of teaching them. Then we are allowed to, for instance, use our voice, right? For instance, maybe to raise your voice in a way, or to speak in a stern way to the child, to let them know how serious this really is. Because the positive, gentle ways haven't worked, then you're allowed to, for instance, use a stern voice to get the message across. And that kind of increases to the point where we are even allowed to use physical, for instance, a spank or something like that, to show how serious this issue really is. That if the child is not taking their duties Islamically seriously, it can even get to that point where we're allowed to spank the child, for instance. The Islamic guidelines jump in and say, but this isn't an all-out kind of a beating of the child or anything that actually injures the child in any way. Right? So we have strict regulations that even if the parent has to resort to that kind of a thing to as a last resort to get the kid to understand how serious the thing is, they can't even kind of inflict any sort of redness or a bruising or anything on the child. It's something that really just shows the seriousness more than actually injuring the child. And we know that if anyone who has children, you'll know that it's a lot more about your attitude or the way you're looking or the way you're speaking to the child. That's what oftentimes will get the child to realize how serious you are. And if you do resort to spanking, then it's not the pain that's hurting the child. Right? You could be playing around with a child, and in some sort of joke, you give a slap on the back in a joke, and the child will be totally fine. And that slap might be hard. Sometimes you're playing and something like that happens. The spank might be much gentler than that, but because your attitude is different, your attitude is one of sternness. Even the gentle spank shocks the child and makes them realize that, okay, I've crossed the line here, and now I need to backtrack and figure out how I can please my parents. Right? So there's a role for violence, but it's violence at this very, very kind of low level, and only as a last resort when nothing else works and every other path has been expended. Then there is the issue of another kind of a section of fiqh where violence of a sort is allowed, is the issue within a marriage. Right? This is the controversial verse that always gets people in arms about Islam being unjust to women. That I mentioned that the quality of a nashiza. But a nashiza is the term in fiqh that's used for a woman who fails to fulfill her obligations to her husband. And the word nashiz is also used in the Quran for men who fail to fulfill their obligations towards their wives. Right? So it's a mutual thing. Each one has certain rights on the other, and if either one fails in those rights, then they are remiss, and there are certain consequences for being remiss. So Allah has placed the ability and the authority to be able to rectify the situation in the husband's hands, but again, with a certain protocol and with heavy restrictions on how this is to be executed. Very similar to what I just mentioned with children. Right? So here as well, he puts in that famous verse from Surah An-Nisa, he mentions that there are three, if the woman becomes a nashiza and refuses to fulfill the husband's rights, then the first recourse that he has, the first protocol, is to talk to her, to tell her and remind her that this is something that I have a right over you concerning. Right, so the first recourse is with words. The second stage, if that doesn't work, right? For one thing, we understand that even if it comes to that, where he's now having to demand his right, then there's already something wrong. It could have been solved a lot earlier than that, in a lot better way than that, even before that. But this is when things have gotten to the point where now Islamic law has to step in. Authority is given first for him to remind her with words. Secondly, to give her kind of a cold shoulder in some way that shows his displeasure with this position that she has. And then thirdly, as a last resort, when nothing else works, it gives him the authority to use that same kind of discipline that a parent would use for a child as a last resort. A man is allowed to use that kind of level of discipline with his wife as well. Right? It's not all-out wife beating. It's not a first resort, but an absolute last resort when nothing else, no other rational kind of measure works. And that too, the same restrictions apply, where it's a disciplinary kind of action. That's the seriousness of it, not that the pain or there's pain or violence involved where the woman's actually being hurt in any way. So that's another area of Islamic law where there's a role for this kind of level of very controlled and selective violence. One area of Islamic law, I can always hear the pens writing as I say that on the women's side, as they write their questions and their objections to that. But it's it's a reality that we have. It's a little bit of a digression, but just to understand that it is a challenge for us to understand, especially in our context in the West here, when there's such a movement in society against violence against women, which is a correct movement. We should also be part of that. That violence against women is something that Muslim men should also be party to, where we're against this kind of thing that happens in many situations where men unfortunately do terrible things to their wives. This law of Islam has nothing to do with violence against women. It doesn't sanction it, it doesn't encourage it, or anything like that. One of the justifications that we have for why this particular power of discipline is given to the husband instead of being taken to the court of law is because of the urgency of this particular matter. I was speaking kind of ishara, just to make it a little bit more proper for the gathering. But when this need happens and the right has to be fulfilled, right? That's not a circumstance where you can delay and say, well, tomorrow we'll go to the court and we'll settle this. We'll get someone else to intervene, right? It's something that's urgent enough that has to be fulfilled right away and satisfied right away. And because of that, Allah has placed this particular protocol with these particular safeguards in the discretion of the husband to be able to exercise these immediately, right? And given him the authority to take care of this right away instead of having to go to a third party, the next day or whenever the court is available to be able to resolve this thing, right? So hopefully that helps to kind of explain a little bit about why this particular power has been given to the husband. A couple more areas of fiqh. One is in self-defense. So certainly the violence is completely justified in matters of self-defense. If someone else is attacking me, someone else has invaded my home, then I have not only the right but even the obligation to use whatever is necessary to repel them and defend myself, my family, my property. So violence there is good and justified because it's a necessary means to a great end, which is protecting yourselves. Defense of a mazloom, defense of someone who's been wronged, who needs our help. Even if it comes to violence, so be it. That's a justifiable end for this particular means. Like Musa alayhi salam, he stepped in to help the Shi'i of his Shia who was being wronged by an Egyptian. Right? He steps in to, first of all, to try to separate them, to try to convince the person to stop, beating on this Shi'i Jew of his, a Jewish follower of his. And when nothing works, then he ends up having to resort to violence, and he punches or hits the person in some way. And the person ends up dying, right? Not because Moses hit him so hard, but because maybe he stumbled and fell, and somehow he died accidentally, right? But Moses was totally justified, and he stood by his decision. Right? He tells Allah that you've given me, because of all the blessings you've given me, I'm never going to let this happen again. I'm never going to stand by and let someone mazloom be oppressed by somebody, and the next day the same thing happens, and again he stands up to do the same thing, but his plan doesn't work. He ends up his identity is revealed, these kinds of things. But he stands up even a second time and does the same thing again. He's ready to stand by his words from the previous day and defend someone again, even if it comes to violence. One last area I just wanted to mention in passing is in hunting and slaughtering animals. Because we have different groups that are advocates of vegetarianism and veganism and these kinds of things, thinking that just as violence against humans is wrong, violence against animals is also wrong. Right? We should understand that has nothing to do with Islam. And Islam teaches us that the animals are here as one of the blessings that Allah has given us, and we are completely justified in using them for food. Right? There's absolutely nothing wrong. The violence that we dole out to an animal by slaughtering it or by shooting it, for instance, and for hunting, it's a completely justified form of violence because the end, which is feeding ourselves, is something that's great enough, and Allah Himself has sanctioned that kind of violence against them. That's not. We should also realize that unwarranted violence against animals is not permissible. It is a sin. It is haram. Right? So, for instance, we're not allowed to go sport hunting. Right? Hunting for food is one thing. That's justifiable. But people who go sport hunting and shoot bears or shoot, lions or these kinds of things, just for the fun of it or just for the trophy, that's completely unjustified and that's haram. Right? Whereas shooting a deer or a bird or something like that, which is halal to eat and you actually consume the meat, right? That's justified and that's okay. And the same thing goes for insects, for instance. Right? We're allowed to use violence against insects that are bothering us by exterminating them or whatever. If they're in our houses, the ants that apparently are going to come here when people's snacks fall on the ground. Right? So using ways to kill those would be one thing. But if you see ants on the sidewalk outside where they're not bothering you at all, just to go and step on them for no reason. Right? I always think when I see ants on the sidewalk, even if I'm on my bike, I swerve around and try to avoid them. And I always think of Sulaiman alayhi salam and his encounter with the ants. Right? They come through and the ant queen announces that, everyone run for cover because Sulaiman's coming, and Sulaiman hears her and he kind of chuckles and he wishes she would realize that he's more merciful than that. He wouldn't trample her for no reason and let his army go in and run over them. Right? So we should also have that sense of mercy and realize violence in some cases is sanctioned, and in some cases it's not sanctioned at all. All right. Any questions? Luckily the barrier is here, so I can't see any hands from the sister's side. Okay, go ahead, sister.
I want to ask if the rule that you apply to men having the last resort to their wife, would that hold for a wife if a husband is not fulfill his duty?
Yeah, no, that's not one of the options for her. Right? There are other ways that she can retaliate against him using a third-party arbitrator to come in and force him to fulfill his obligations to her. But the violence, even at that level, is not something that's sanctioned for her. Right? Probably because it wouldn't be effective in most cases, even at that level. Like imagine trying to use that kind of physical discipline on someone who's bigger than you or stronger than you. That's not an effective way of disciplining. There are other ways that you could appeal to a higher authority who can come in and step in and right the wrong for you.
So, in Islam, it is said that if a Muslim kills someone else, it is said that what's his punishment? Is it a death penalty? In Islam, is it a death penalty?
Yeah. So he's asking about the penalty for murder. So it's a little bit more complicated. First of all, this discussion only is even relevant within an Islamic government. So if someone were to be murdered here in this society, we'd have no choice but to resort to the law of the land here, and we'd have to be satisfied with whatever judgment is passed over here. But in an Islamic government, yes, murder is divided up into 3 different categories. There's intentional murder, which I think is called first-degree murder over here, and then there's kind of a complete unintentional murder, and then there's something kind of a hybrid between the two. Where, for instance, you intended to do something, you intended to shoot, but you didn't realize that it was a human being. So you intended to shoot, but you didn't intend to kill. And so there are 3 different punishments for those 3 different things. But yeah, in general, for first-degree murder, the punishment is just retaliation, where the heirs of the murdered victim would have the choice to either kill you in the same way, or they have the choice of receiving blood money, which is a value that Islamic law, it's not the Islamic Sharia places on the life of a human being. And the third choice would be to forgive you altogether and completely take nothing from you.
But like it says that when someone kills someone, like if a Muslim kills someone else, it's said that like Islam is gonna punish him. Right. So how does Islam punish him? Like is God's like if we kill him, if we execute him, what's gonna happen after death? What's gonna happen from after that?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so these kinds of punishments, there's absolutely no role for individuals to come in and step in and execute people and carry out these kinds of retaliations. There's absolutely no justification for that Islamically. Right? So that should be a clear message to everyone. The kind of things that happen in Pakistan, Afghanistan, different places where someone comes and kills my brother, so my whole clan goes and retaliates and that kind of stuff, where people take justice into their own hands. There's no room for that in Islam. Right? It's a just Islamic government which has the power and the authority to impose these Islamic judgments on people only after due process has been observed. That's a worldly. I think you're asking kind of about the other worldly punishment in the hereafter. So there's a worldly punishment for certain crimes, and then there's also a punishment in the hereafter. And they're 2 different things. The punishment in this world is something that through due process it's established that this person deserves a particular punishment. It could happen the person repents. He realizes that he made a terrible mistake, but the punishment is still carried out on him. Right? The same way, even in our law here in America, the same thing happens. You kill someone and you feel terrible about it afterwards, and you are remorseful. You're still going to be punished the same way. It might affect the severity of your sentencing and things like that, but the punishment still happens. They don't say, "Oh, if you're sorry, that's okay. You can go free." Right? There's still a punishment that has to be given for that. So Islamic law is the same way. That has nothing to do with the otherworldly punishment. That's for Allah to judge how, kind of what led to the person to do such a thing, whether he was truly remorseful, he repented for it or not, and all that stuff. Yeah, so he'll take care of that in the judgment. One last question.
Going back to the verse about man's authority over the woman, you gave a justification is because of the urgency he was given that power, but it's 3-step process.
Right.
So which means it's not urgent. That's what it looked like in the verse. First you gotta talk to them, then you leave them alone or sleep away from them, and then if that doesn't work, you go to the 3rd step. So there is no urgency, it seems, in the verse.
All that stuff can happen in one night or one sitting.
But
There's no requirement that it has to be several days of giving the cold shoulder or something like that.
so the man normally, what they do, they step from that, instead they go to the last.
That's their problem. That's
Right.
their incorrect action. But
But-
the system is something different. The protocol we're supposed to follow, there's certain steps put in the path to make sure that the least amount of action on the man's part is exercised to get the effective the result. Right? We're not even in Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. We're never allowed to jump to the extreme just because someone's doing something wrong. Start yelling at them right away. Absolutely not. That's not justified. First, figure out the situation, see why the person is doing it. Is there a justification for it? There's so many different steps to kind of ease your way into the situation to make sure that you do the very least, so that you don't even. The best thing is to do it in a way where a person doesn't even realize that you've done it. Right? Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein's example of how they taught the old man how to do wudu. That's one of the prime examples that are given in hadith, where they taught him in a way that he didn't even realize. He realized that they were smarter than him. Right? But they did it in such a respectful way, in such a beautiful way, that he accepted it right away. Right? Where they could have come and told him, "Old man, why aren't you doing the wudu properly? Here's the way to do it." They could have said it like that, but they chose a tactical way, which is very effective on an elderly person. Recite with salawat, please. I'm going to recite some accounts of the events that happened on the eve of Ashura. This was the day of Tasu'a, the 9th of Muharram. And on this eve, significant things took place, and there are also some very moving conversations and speeches that were exchanged in the camp of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. On the 7th of Muharram, the following message was sent by Ubaydullah bin Ziyad to the commander of the Kufan army, Umar bin Sa'd. Bar Hussein and his companions from the river, so that they do not taste a drop of it, just as he did with the pure, the pious, the poor commander of the faithful, Uthman bin Affan wassalam. When this message reached Umar bin Sa'd, he gave Amr ibn al-Hajjaj command of 500 troops to bar Imam Hussein's camp from the water of the Euphrates. When the Kufan troops had taken their positions, a soldier from among them named Abdullah ibn Hussein al-Azdi yelled out to al-Hussein's camp, Imam Hussein's camp, "O Hussein, do you not see this water? It looks blue like the sky. By God, you shall not taste a drop of it, and you shall die of thirst." Amr ibn al-Hajjaj yelled out, "O Hussein, dogs are free to wallow in this water. The pigs and donkeys of Kufa are free to drink from it, as are wolves. But you shall not drink a drop of it. By God, until you taste the boiling water of hellfire." When the dearth of water became hard in his camp, Imam Hussein dug a well behind the women's tent until fresh water gushed forth. He and his camp drank to their fill and filled their water skins. Upon hearing news of this well, Ubaydullah bin Ziyad wrote the following letter to Umar ibn Sa'd. "It has come to my attention that Al-Hussein is digging wells and obtaining water such that he and his companions are drinking. So listen to me. As soon as this letter reaches you, prevent them from digging wells to the utmost of your ability. Be severe with them and do not allow them to taste a drop, Do to them as they did to Uthman the pure. Wassalam. لما أصبح الحسين عليه السلام أذن وأقام وصلى بأصحابه. So on the morning of the 9th, Imam Hussein woke up, they gave the adhan and they prayed along with their entire camp. فلما فرغ استدعى بدرع جده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وتعمم بعمامته السحاب وتقلد بسيف أبيه ذي الفقار. After finishing his prayer, he asked that his the armor of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam be brought for him. The imama of the Prophet, which was called sahab, was also brought. And the sword of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Dhul Fiqar, was brought for him to wear. ونزل إلى القوم وقال أيها الناس اعلموا أن الدنيا دار فناء وزوال متغيرة بأهلها من حال إلى حال. So wearing all of this gear from the Prophet, from his father, he goes out to the people of Kufa and he addresses them. He says, people know that the dunya that you're fighting for, the dunya that you think you're going to get, it's all going to fade, it's all going to go away. معاشر الناس عرفتم شرائع الإسلام وقرأتم القرآن وعلمتم أن محمدا صلى الله عليه وآله رسول الملك الديان ووثبتم على قتل ولده ظلما وعدوانا. He says, you know the Sharia, you read the Quran, you know that Prophet Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and here you are ready to kill his son, his grandson, in this sort of unjust way. معاشر الناس أما ترون إلى ماء الفرات يموج كأنه بطون الحيات. You see the water of the Euphrates, it shimmers like the scales of a snake. Jews, Christians are free to drink from it. Dogs and pigs are free to drink from it. وَآلُ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ يَمُوتُونَ عَطَشًا. And the family of the Messenger of Allah is here dying of thirst. فَقَالُوا لَهُ اقْصِرْ عَنْ هَذَا الْكَلَامِ فَلَنْ تَذُوقَ الْمَاءَ وَلَا أَحَدٌ مِّنْ أَصْحَابِكَ. The people of Kufa, they said, be quiet, Hussein. Stop talking. Neither you nor any of your companions is ever going to drink from this water. بَلْ تَذُوقُ الْمَوْتَ غُصَّةً بَعْدَ غُصَّةً. Rather, we're going to force death down your throat, make you swallow death. فلما سمع الحسين عليه السلام كلامهم رجع إلى أصحابه وقال لهم إن القوم استحوذ عليهم الشيطان. He goes back and he recites this verse from the Quran and says that Shaitan has taken full hold of these people and he's made them forget Allah altogether. أولئك حزب الشيطان. These are the partisans of Shaitan. ألا إن حزب الشيطان هم الخاسرون. And they are indeed the losers. ودعا الحسين برجل من أصحابه يقال له أنس بن كاهل وقال له امضي إلى هؤلاء القوم وذكرهم الله تعالى ورسوله. Imam Hussein talks to Anas ibn Kahil, one of his companions, and says, go out to these people and see what you can do. See if you can remind them of their duty to Allah. عساهم يرجعون إلى عن قتالنا وأعلم أنهم لا يرجعون ولكن لتكون لي عليهم حجة يوم القيامة. He says, go and see if you can remind them of their duty. Hopefully they'll repent. But of course I know they're not going to repent. But at least I'll have completed my hujjah against them on the Day of Judgment. So Anas ibn Kahil goes out and he speaks to the people of Kufa. Ya akha Kahil. He speaks to his own tribe who's there in the Kufan army. Ya akha Kahil. Ma mana'aka an tusallima alayh. Sorry, he goes to Umar ibn Sa'd. He goes to Umar ibn Sa'd and he fails to say salam to Umar ibn Sa'd, and Umar ibn Sa'd takes offense to this. He says, Ya akha Kahil, ma mana'aka an tusallima alayh. Why do you not say salam to me? Am I not a Muslim? Wallahi ma kafartu wa qad araftu Allah wa rasulah. Umar ibn Sa'd, he's on the defensive. He says, by God, I'm not a kafir. I believe in Allah, I believe in His Messenger. So Anas responds, كيف عرفت الله ورسوله وأنت تريد أن تقتل ولده وأهل بيته ومن نصره. What kind of faith do you have in Allah and His Messenger when you're so ready and willing to kill his son and his family and those who help them? So Umar bin Sa'd says, إني أعلم أن قاتلهم في النار لا محالة. I recognize that whoever kills them is heading to hellfire. ولكن لابد أن أنفذ أمر الأمير عبيد الله بن زياد. I know I'm heading for fire if I kill them, but I have to fulfill the command of my commander Ubaydullah bin Ziyad. فرجع أنس إلى الحسين وأخبره بما قال. Anas goes back and tells Imam Hussein, there's no hope for these people. وبينما الحسين واضع رأسه بين ركبتيه سمعت الحوراء زينب بنت علي عليها السلام الصيحة وضجة الخيل. So they're back in the camp, and Sayyidah Zainab, she hears a commotion outside. She hears horses coming towards their camp. Imam Hussein sends his brother Abbas. He says, "Irkab بنفسي أنت حتى تلقاهم واسألهم عما جاءهم وما الذي يريدون." He sends Abbas alayhi salam, out to these people. He sends them with 20 horse riders and says, "Go out to these people and see what they want." So Abbas rides with Zuhair on one side of him and Habib ibn Mudahir on the other. He goes out and he receives the response from this delegation from the Kufan army, which says that we are here to carry out, to give you two choices. Either you accept the rule of Yazid over you, or we'll force you to do so by fighting against you. So Abbas comes back and he informs Imam Hussein of their demands. At this point, Habib ibn Mudahir, he speaks. He says, أما والله لبئس القوم قوم يقدمون غدا على الله ورسوله وقد قتلوا ذريته وأهل بيته. And he says, the worst people are those who approach Allah on the Day of Judgment having killed the family of his Prophet and his progeny. المتهجدين بالأسحار الذاكرين الله بالليل والنهار وشيعته الأتقياء الأبرار. And he praises the Ahlul Bayt and the companions of the Ahlul Bayt as being people who stay up at night worshipping, who remember Allah day and night. So a person from the delegation of the Kufans, he turns on Habib and says, "It sounds like you're praising yourself. Here you're praising the Shia Hussein. You're one of the Shia. You're praising yourself." So Habib responds and he says, if I am pure, if I am praiseworthy, it's because of Allah and what He has done to guide me and put me on this path, not because of some praise of my own. اتق الله يا ابن قيس, he says to this person. ولا تكن من الذين يعينون على الضلال وقتل النفوس الزكية الطاهرة وعترة خير الأنبياء. So beware that you're not amongst those who are going to lead people astray and kill these righteous progeny of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the person says, إنك لم تكن عندنا من شيعة أهل البيت. He says, I'm surprised. Actually speaking to Zuhair at this point, he says, Zuhair, I'm surprised that you're on this side, that you're here with Abbas and with Hussein. You weren't one of us before. You were a supporter of Uthman until recently. How did you become Turabiyan? He says, you were Uthmaniyan. How did you become Turabiyan? Zuhair says, Inni kuntu kadhalik. It's right, I was a follower of Uthman. I was aligned with him. But once I saw Hussein and I saw that his rights had been taken from him, I remembered his relation to his father, his grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَرَأَيْتُ لِنَفْسِي أَنْ أَنْصُرَهُ وَأَكُونَ مِنْ حِزْبِهِ. So I decided that I'm going to aid him because of his relation to his Prophet, and I'm going to be one of his party and not the party of his enemy. وَأَجْعَلَ نَفْسِي مِنْ دُونِ نَفْسِهِ. I'm going to sacrifice myself for him. حِفْظًا لِمَا ضَيَّعْتُم مِنْ حَقِّ اللَّهِ وَحَقِّ رَسُولِهِ. And I'm going to stand in place and make up for what rights of his you have trampled by fulfilling those rights to him. They go back to Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein tells them to go back once more and tell them to give us one last night to pray. On a night like this, on the night of Tasu'ah, he says, give us a little bit longer. Let's not fight tonight. Let's wait until tomorrow. And then tomorrow we'll give you our answer, our final answer. His words to Abbas are that I'd like to spend this night praying, to recite the Quran, because I love to recite the Quran. Abbas goes back to seek what the Imam has said, to get permission from them. They have a discussion amongst the Kufan army. Umar bin Sa'ad, he gets advice from people. He says, should we listen to them or not? Should we accept this request of theirs or not? Even within his camp, some people scold Umar bin Sa'ad and say, if Kuffar had requested something like this, requested for us to delay the war for a little bit, we would have listened to them right away. And here we're debating over whether we should listen to the son of the Messenger of Allah and give him this request. So Umar bin Sa'ad, under the pressure, he gives in and he says, fine, we'll wait until tomorrow to see what happens then. وجمع الحسين أصحابه بين يديه ثم حمد الله وأثنى عليه وقال اللهم لك الحمد. Imam Hussein, on the night of Tasu'ah, he gathers his companions and his Ahlul Bayt together. He begins by praising Allah and then says, أما بعد فإني لا أعلم أصحابا أصلح منكم. I know of no companions better than you. وَلَا أَعْلَمُ أَهْلَ بَيْتٍ أَبَرَّ وَلَا أَوْصَلَ وَلَا أَفْضَلَ مِنْ أَهْلِ بَيْتِي. I know of no Ahlul Bayt of any prophet or any wasi which is better than my Ahlul Bayt. فَجَزَاكُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا عَنِّي خَيْرًا. May Allah reward you for the faithfulness and the steadfastness that you've shown me. إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ مَا يَطْلُبُونَ أَحَدًا غَيْرِي وَلَوْ قَدْ أَصَابُونِي وَقَدَرُوا عَلَى قَتْلِي لَمَا طَلَبُوكُمْ أَبَدًا. These people, they only want me. They want to kill me. If they kill me, they don't want anyone else. They'll leave everyone else. And the night is so dark. I take the night as an escape route and go. لِيَأْخُذْ كُلُّ رَجْلٍ مِّنْكُمْ بِيَدِ رَجْلٍ مِّنْ إِخْوَتِي. And each of you, my companions, when you escape, take one of my Ahlul Bayt as well with you and escape into the dark and leave me to fight with these people. وَتَفَرَّقُوا فِي سَوَادِ هَذَا اللَّيْلِ وَذَرُونِي وَهَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ. First, the brothers of Hussein speak. One of them says, يَبْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ فَمَاذَا تَقُولُ النَّاسُ وَمَاذَا نَقُولُ لَهُم. Right, what are we going to tell people if we were to escape like this and leave you and abandon you? That we left our master and our leader, that we left the son of the messenger of Allah. وَلَمْ نَرْبِ مَعَهُ بِسَهْمٍ وَلَمْ نَطْعَنْ بِرُمْحٍ وَلَمْ نَضْرِبْ بِسَيْفٍ. We abandoned him without even shooting an arrow at the enemy, without even casting a spear or swinging our sword. La wallahi yabna Rasulullah, la nufaruqaka abada. We'll never part from you, we'll never abandon you, Ya Hussein. وَلَكِنَّا نَفْدِيكَ بِأَنفُسِنَا. We'll sacrifice ourselves for your sake. We'll be killed for your sake and we'll end up in the same position in the afterlife as you. فَقَبَّحَ اللَّهُ الْعَيْشَ مِنْ بَعْدِكَ. There's no pleasure, there's no purpose in life once you have been killed. Muslim ibn Awsaja comes forth and he speaks. He says, يَا ابْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أَنَحْنُ نُخَلِّيكَ هَكَذَا وَنَنْصَرِفُ عَنْكَ. Should we abandon you and leave you? وَقَدْ أَحَاطَ بِكَ هَؤُلَاءِ الْأَعْدَاءِ. Your enemy is here at your doorstep. لا والله لا يراني الله وأنا أفعل ذلك أبدا. May Allah never see such an act of abandonment from me. حتى أكسر في صدورهم رمحي. Until I crack my spear in their chests. And I take my sword and I strike them with my sword. As long as the handle of my sword stays in my hands. وَلَوْ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِي سِلَاحٌ أُقَاتِلُهُمْ بِهِ لَقَذَفْتُهُمْ بِالْحِجَارَةِ. If there's no weapon left in my hand, I'll take rocks and fight them with rocks. But I'll never abandon you until I die before you. One companion named Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi speaks. He says, Ya la wallahi yabna Rasulullah, la nukhalika abada. We'll never abandon you until Allah knows that we have fulfilled all of our obligations to you. وَوَاللَّهِ لَوْ عَلِمْتُ أَنِّي أُقْتَلْ ثُمَّ أُحْيَا ثُمَّ أُحْرَقْ حَيًّا يُفْعَلُ بِي ذَلِكَ 70 مَرَّةً لَمَا فَارَقْتُكَ أَبَدًا حَتَّى أَلْقَى الْحِمَامِ مِنْ دُونِكَ. Even if I know that I'm going to be killed and then raised again and then burnt and then killed and raised again, all this for 70 times, I'll never abandon you until I die for your sake. وَكَيْفَ لَا أَفْعَلْ ذَلِكَ وَإِنَّمَا هِيَ قَتْلَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. Why shouldn't I do it? It's just one death. ثُمَّ أَنَالُ الْحَرَامَةَ الَّتِي لَا انْقِضَاءَ لَهَا أَبَدًا. After that one single death, I'll have eternal bliss in paradise for the sacrifice I make for you. Then as altogether they say, أَنفُسُنَا لَكَ الْفِدَاءِ. We all will sacrifice ourselves for you, Hussein. وَنَقِيكَ بِأَيْدِينَا وَوُجُوهِنَا وَصُدُورِنَا. We will use our hands, our faces, and our chests to protect you. فَإِذَا نَحْنُ قُتِلْنَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْكَ نَكُونُ قَدْ وَفَّيْنَا وَقَضَيْنَا مَا عَلَيْنَا. If we die, at least we'll have fulfilled our obligation to you. Once Imam Hussein hears everyone's words and he sees that they're all sincere and they're all solidly with him, he allows them to see their future. He says, إِنِّي غَدًا أُقْتَلْ وَكُلُّكُمْ تُقْتَلُونَ مَعِي. Tomorrow I shall be killed and all of you shall be killed with me. وَلَا يَبْقَى مِنْكُمْ أَحَدٌ حَتَّى الْقَاسِمِ وَعَبْدِ اللَّهِ الرَّضِيعِ. Not a single one of you will survive, not even Qasim ibn al-Hassan, not even my son Abdullah al-Radi' Ali al-Asghar. إِلَّا وَلَدِي عَلِيٌّ زَيْنُ الْعَابِدِينَ. The only one who will survive is my son Ali Zayn al-Abidin. بِأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَمْ يَقْطَعْ نَسْلِي مِنْهُ وَهُوَ أَبُو أَئِمَّةٍ ثَمَانِيَةٍ. Allah will not allow his line or my line through him to be wiped out, and he will be the father of 8 Imams. فَقَالُوا بِأَجْمَعِهِمْ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ الَّذِي أَكْرَمَنَا بِنَصْرِكَ وَشَرَّفَنَا بِالْقَتْلِ مَعَكَ. The response to the companions and Ahlul Bayt is, Allah deserves all praise that He has given us this noble position by allowing us to help you and to allow us to be sacrificed and martyred with you. أَوَلَا نَرْضَى أَن نَكُونَ مَعَكَ فِي دَرَجَتِكَ يَا ابْنَ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. Is it not enough for us that we are going to be at your station in the hereafter, Ya ibn Rasulullah? ثُمَّ دَعَا وَقَالَ لَهُمْ إِرْفَعُوا رُؤُوسَكُمْ وَانْظُرُوا. He tells them, after having tested them, after having informed them that they're going to die, he says, all of you raise your heads, raise your gazes and look. فَجَعَلُوا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى مَوَاضِعِهِمْ وَمَنَازِلِهِمْ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ. He allowed them for a moment to be able to see their positions in paradise. وَهُوَ يَقُولُ لَهُمْ هَذَا مَنْزِلُكَ يَا فُلَانِ. He called out to Habib and said, this is your reward in paradise. Zuhair, this is your reward in paradise. And one by one he took their names and showed them where they will be, what they'll benefit from, who their partners will be in paradise, and they saw all this. فَكَانَ الرَّجْلُ يَسْتَقْبِلُ الرِّمَاحَ وَالسُّيُوفِ بِصَدْرِهِ وَوَجْهِهِ لِيَصِلَ إِلَى مَنْزِلِهِ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ. As they entered the battlefield, they faced the weapons of the enemies, knowing and with the intention that they were just taking steps to get to their place in paradise. Imam Hussein left his tents that night, on a night like this. He left his tents to go and to make plans for the next day, to strategize and see where are places where the enemy might hide, and to make plans for how he would defend against attacks from here and there. One of his companions accompanied him and came kind of following, shadowing him to make sure he was safe. When he returns, Zainab salamullahi alayhi comes to him and she says, هَلْ إِسْتَعْلَمْتَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِكَ نِيَّاتِهِمْ. She's worried about him to see, are these people going to stay with you? Have you tested them fully to see if they're truly with you? فَإِنِّي أَخْشَى أَن يُسْلِمُوكَ عِنْدَ الْوَثْبَةِ. I'm afraid that they'll abandon you when the battle gets heated. فَقَالَ لَهَا وَاللَّهِ لَقَدْ بَلَوْتُهُمْ فَمَا وَجَدْتُ فِيهِمْ إِلَّا الْأَشْوَشَ الْأَقْعَسِ. I've tested them in every single way. I've given them every opportunity to escape. I've freed them from any responsibility. I've done everything I can, and I see that they are solid in their intention. يَسْتَأْنِسُونَ بِالْمَنِيَّةِ دُونِي اسْتِنَاسَ الطِّفْلِ إِلَى مَحَالِبِ أُمِّهِ. These companions of mine, they are more eager for death than a child is eager for the breast of his mother. At the time of dawn, Imam Hussein falls asleep for a few moments, and he awakes and he tells his companions, أَتَعْلَمُونَ مَا رَأَيْتُ فِي مَنَامِيَ السَّاعَةِ. Do you know what I just saw in my dream? فَقَالُوا مَا رَأَيْتَ. And he says, مَا رَأَيْتُ, he says, رَأَيْتُ كِلَابًا قَدْ شَدَّتْ عَلَيَّ لِتَنْهَشَنِي وَفِيهَا كَلْبٌ أَبْقَى رَأَيْتُهُ كَأَشَدِّهَا عَلَيَّ. He says, I saw two things. First of all, I saw a pack of dogs attacking me. And I saw that one of them was speckled and spotted and had kind of spotty skin. And he seemed like the most severe of all of these. وَأَظُنُّ الَّذِي يَتَوَلَّى قَتْلِي رَجُلٌ أَبْرَسْ مِنْ هَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ. He says, I think that this is a message that says that the one who's going to attack me and kill me is going to be someone who has splotchy skin, and he's going to be the one to kill me. ثم إني رأيت بعد ذلك جدي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وجماعة من أصحابه وهو يقول يا بني أنت شهيد آل محمد. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم says, you are a martyr from our family. وقد استبشر بك أهل السماوات وأهل الصفيح الأعلى. He says that everyone is eager to see you, everyone is glad to receive you soon. فليكن إفطارك عندي الليلة. On this evening, inshallah, you will have your iftar and you will break your fast with me. عَجِّلْ يَا بُنَيَّ وَلَا تَتَأَخَّرْ. Hurry, rush towards me, don't delay. فَهَذَا مَلَكٌ نَزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ لِيَأْخُذَ دَمَكَ فِي قَارُورَةٍ خَضْرَاءٍ. There's an angel who has been discharged specifically to collect your blood. فهذا ما رأيت وقد أزف الأمر واقترب الرحيل من هذه الدنيا. He tells his companions finally that the time is near. My journey from this world to the next is soon at hand. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.